still remember the exact moment I realized my family didn't see me as a daughter. They saw me as a resource. It was a Sunday. Late October. The kind of afternoon where the light comes through the windows at that low angle and makes everything look golden and warm, even when it isn't. I was standing in my kitchen stirring a pot of chili I'd been making since noon, and my phone buzzed on the counter. My mother. Just wanted to confirm you're still coming Thursday. Your brother will be there. It'll be so good for everyone to be together. I stared at that message for a long time. Everyone. Like I was just another guest at a table I'd spent my whole life paying for in ways no one ever acknowledged. I went anyway. Of course I did. Because that's what I'd always done. My name is Vera. I'm 31 years old. I work in healthcare administration at a mid-size hospital network in Charlotte, North Carolina, and 2 years ago, after 9 years of working, budgeting, and saying no to basically everything fun, I bought a 2-bedroom condo on the 14th floor of a building in Uptown. Floor-to-ceiling windows, a small balcony where I can see the city lights at night, a parking spot with my name on the wall in yellow letters. It is mine, every single square foot of it. I know that because I have the deed, the closing documents, and 108 months of bank statements that say exactly how I got there. I grew up in a suburb outside of Raleigh. My parents had 2 kids, me and my brother, who is 3 years older and has never in his adult life held a job for longer than 14 months. I say that not to be cruel. I say it because it is the single most relevant fact in this entire story. Growing up, I was the one who kept my head down. I got decent grades, stayed out of trouble, took out student loans for community college because my parents said they didn't have money for tuition, worked part-time at a pharmacy while taking 18 credit hours, transferred to UNC Charlotte, graduated with a degree in health informatics, and started my first real job at 23. My brother, meanwhile, dropped out of his first semester at NC State, which my parents paid for in full, moved back home, cycled through a series of jobs in sales, landscaping, personal training, and something he vaguely described as logistics consulting that I'm fairly certain was just driving for a friend's moving company. He had a long-term girlfriend who he'd been with since high school. They had 2 kids by the time he was 28. My parents helped with rent, then helped again, then helped again. I never said anything about it, not directly. What would be the point? My parents weren't cruel people, they were just people who had decided, somewhere along the way, that my brother needed more and I needed less, and that this was fair because I was doing so well. Doing well. Like stability was something that happened to me instead of something I built with my own 2 hands while everyone else looked the other way. I moved to Charlotte at 23 for the job. Rented a studio apartment, then a 1-bedroom, kept every receipt, tracked every dollar in a spreadsheet I still have saved on 3 different devices. My goal was always the same: own something. Own something that no one could take away or ask me to share or borrow against without my permission. It took 9 years. I put 20% down, $68,000, which I saved by not taking vacations, not buying new furniture, not upgrading my car when mine had 140,000 miles on it. The mortgage is $1,840 a month. I have never missed a payment. Not once. The condo appraised at $347,000 when I bought it. Last fall, Zillow had it estimated at around $390,000. I know these numbers the way other people know their children's birthdays. My brother got engaged last spring. Her name is the kind of name that sounds like someone's trying very hard to be casual, the kind of woman who posts a lot of good vibes only content and refers to my brother as her partner in everything, which I suspect includes his habit of never finishing anything he starts. I don't say that to be mean. I actually liked her the few times we met. She seemed genuine. She was just attached to someone who had never figured out how to be a grown adult, which was not her fault and also not my problem. They announced in June that they were expecting their 3rd child together. She had a daughter from a previous relationship who my brother had been helping raise since she was 2. So technically this was going to be their 4th child total in the household. My mother called me the day after the announcement. She cried. She said she was so happy. She said this baby was going to bring the family together. She said she wished they had more space to raise their family with dignity. I said, "That's wonderful news," and asked if they picked any names yet. I did not yet understand that this phone call was the opening move. Thanksgiving was at my parents' house in Raleigh. I drove up Wednesday night, stayed at their place, helped my mother prep the green bean casserole and sweet potato situation that she makes every year. It was fine. Normal. My brother arrived Thanksgiving morning with his fiancée and the kids. The house got loud. The kids ran around. Somebody knocked a candle off the mantle. After dinner, after the dishes, after the kids were put in front of a movie, my father asked me to come sit with him and my mother in the den. My brother was already in there, sitting in my dad's armchair. His fiancée was in the hallway, and I could see her through the doorway, scrolling on her phone like she was trying very hard to look like she didn't know what was about to happen. My father cleared his throat. He said he and my mother had been doing a lot of thinking. He said my brother and his fiancée needed more space, especially with the new baby coming. He said their current apartment, which my parents had been partially subsidizing for 2 years, wasn't going to be big enough. He said they thought it might make sense for me to let my brother and his family move into my condo. The room was quiet. I thought for a second that I'd misheard. I actually tipped my head slightly like you do when something doesn't register. "What?" I said. My father explained patiently, the way you explain something to a child who's being a little slow. That my condo had 2 bedrooms and I was living there alone. That my brother had 4 people to think about. That it would only be temporary, maybe a year or 2, just until they got back on their feet. I looked at my mother. She was looking at the rug. I said, "Dad, that's my home. I own it. I pay the mortgage on it every month. You're asking me to do what, exactly? Move out?" He said not necessarily move out. He said maybe I could stay in a 2nd bedroom while they got settled. Just for a few months. I need you to understand how hard I worked to not laugh in his face at that moment. Or cry. I'm still not sure which one I was closer to. I said, calmly as I could, "I'm not doing that. That's my home." My mother finally looked up. She said something I will remember for the rest of my life. She said, "You're in a position to help. Most people don't get to be in a position to help their family. That's a blessing." My brother hadn't said a word. He was looking at the arm of the chair, picking at a loose thread. I stood up. I said I needed some air. I went outside and stood on my parents' back porch in the November cold for about 10 minutes. When I came back in, I told them I loved them. I told them I wasn't having this conversation, and I drove back to Charlotte that night instead of staying over. I thought that was the end of it. It wasn't. December brought a series of phone calls. My mother, mostly. My father, twice. The tone shifted gradually, like water heating up so slowly you don't notice until it's boiling. First it was gentle. "We just want you to think about it." Then it was guilt. "Your brother is really struggling." Then it started edging towards something darker. "You always put yourself first. You've always been that way." I always put myself first. Coming from the woman who never once asked me how I was affording groceries when I was 24 and working 2 jobs. In January, my father told me on the phone that if I wasn't going to be reasonable, they were going to have to look at their legal options. I said, "What legal options, Dad? What are you talking about?" He said, and I am not making this up, that when I was 19, they had given me $4,000 to help me move to Charlotte for my first job, and that this was technically an investment in my future, and that they had a claim on the property I purchased with the money I'd earned. $4,000. I had moved to Charlotte when I was 23, not 19. The $4,000 was a gift my grandmother had left me, which my parents had passed along. It was not from them. It was not an investment. It was my inheritance from a woman who had sewn and babysat and clipped coupons for 40 years so that her grandchildren would have a little something. I sat in my car in a parking garage for a while after that call, just sat there. Then I called a real estate attorney. Her name was Miss Okafor. She had an office in South End, framed diplomas from Duke Law, and about 100 years of professional authority in the way she held a pen. I showed her everything. The deed, my purchase agreement, my mortgage statements, the text messages from my parents, a voice memo I'd started recording of phone calls after the conversation about legal options, which, I have since learned, is entirely legal to do in North Carolina. A one-party consent state. She looked at everything for a long time. Then she looked at me. She said, "There is no legal basis for any claim your parents could make on your property." A $4,000 gift from anyone, for any reason, does not constitute an ownership interest in real estate purchased nearly a decade later. No court would entertain this. I exhaled for what felt like the first time in 2 months. But Ms. Okafor wasn't done. She had a look on her face that I now recognize as the professional equivalent of brace yourself. She said that while reviewing my family's financial situation, which I described in detail, she had some questions about the nature of my parents' financial support for my brother. She asked if I knew whether my parents had co-signed anything for him, any leases, any loans. I said I wasn't sure. Probably, I guessed. She said, "Do you know if your name appears on anything in connection with your parents' finances?" And I felt a cold drop of something land in my stomach. I said no. I didn't think so. I'd never signed anything. She said she'd like to do a more thorough review, just to be certain. She pulled a full credit report on my name and ran a record search that I couldn't have done myself. It took her office about a week. What she found was this. My parents had, at some point in the last 4 years, taken out a home equity line of credit against their own house, using in part the argument that they had family assets which included anticipated inheritance transfers. The line of credit was approximately $94,000. A significant portion of it had gone to my brother. Rent subsidies, a car, medical bills from when his fiancée had a difficult pregnancy with their second child. None of this was illegal on its own. People can do what they want with their equity. But here was the part that made Miss Brechty. Okafor set her pen down very deliberately, buried in a pile of paperwork my parents had sent me 3 years ago. A pile I'd mostly filed without reading, because it was addressed to me as the next of kin for a life insurance update, was a document I had signed. A standard-looking form, except it wasn't entirely standard. A single paragraph buried in page 4 listed me as a secondary financial guarantor on a family loan agreement connected to the HELOC. I hadn't known I was signing that. My parents had slipped it in. I don't know if they understood what it meant at the time. I don't know if they were advised to do it, or if someone just handed them paperwork that included it as a boilerplate addition and they passed it along without looking closely. But I had signed it. Ms. Okafor said it was almost certainly unenforceable. The language was vague. There was no independent legal counsel noted for me, no consideration, and I'd had no knowledge of the terms. She said she could challenge it, but she also said if my parents defaulted on that HELOC, a collections entity could theoretically attempt to come after me first before anyone sorted out the enforceability question. So they were going to pressure you into handing over your condo, she said, and if you didn't, they had a fallback option to create a financial mess around you that would take time and money to untangle. I stared at the ceiling of her office for a while. "What do I do?" I asked. She said, "We get ahead of it." Miss Okafor sent a letter to my parents' address. A formal, very precisely worded letter that did 3 things. It notified them that I had retained legal counsel. It detailed every reason their supposed claim on my property was legally baseless. And it requested, formally and in writing, that they acknowledge my non-participation in the HELOC agreement and release me from any documentation suggesting otherwise. She gave them 14 days to respond. On day 10, my father called me. Not my mother. My father. He sounded different than I'd heard him sound in a long time. Quieter. He said the lawyer they'd consulted, yes, they'd gone to see someone, had told them their position wasn't strong. He said they hadn't meant for things to get like this. He said my mother had been upset, really upset, and that things had been said that maybe shouldn't have been said. I let him talk. He said he was sorry. I don't know exactly what I felt in that moment. It wasn't relief. It wasn't satisfaction. It was something more hollow than either of those things. Like finally getting an answer to a question and realizing the answer doesn't actually fix anything. I said, "Dad, I need you to sign the release Ms. Okafor sent. I need that done by Friday." He said he would. They did. I want to tell you that after the release was signed, everything was resolved, and we had a healing conversation, and now we have a different kind of relationship. Some versions of this story end that way, mine doesn't. Not yet. My brother has not called me. His fiancée sent me a text in February that said I hope we can all move forward as a family, and I responded I hope so too, and we have not spoken since. My mother and I have had 2 phone calls. They're polite. They're the kind of conversations where you can feel both people choosing every word carefully, like you're both walking across the same thin ice and neither of you wants to be the one who goes through. She hasn't apologized, not directly. She said once, "I know this has been hard on everyone," and I had to very deliberately decide not to respond to that, because the version of me that responds to that is not a version I want to be. My father sent me a card in March, a regular card, the kind you'd find in the $3.99 section at CVS, with a picture of a sunrise on the front. Inside he'd written, "I'm proud of you. I don't say it enough. I'm sorry." That was it. I put it in the drawer of my nightstand and I haven't decided yet what to do with it. In April, I called my mortgage servicer to discuss refinancing options. I had been planning to do it eventually. Rates had shifted and my credit score had gone up significantly over the 2 years I'd owned the property. The HELOC situation had spooked me a little, made me want to make sure everything connected to my name was absolutely clean and documented. The loan officer I spoke with pulled my file and said, "Oh wow, your credit history is excellent. You're going to qualify for a significantly better rate." My monthly payment went down by $210. It is a small thing, and also it is not a small thing at all. That afternoon, I went out to my balcony with a cup of coffee and looked at the Charlotte skyline. It was one of those April evenings where the light is just exactly right and you can see all the way downtown and the air smells like it might rain later. But it hasn't yet. The city was doing what cities do, moving, glittering a little, not caring about me one way or another, which I have always found strangely comforting. I thought about being 23 years old, driving a car with a cracked dashboard through the mountains on I-85, all my things in the back, telling myself I was going to build something. I did. Nobody gave it to me. Nobody co-signed my ambition. Nobody subsidized my discipline. Every single dollar that went into the down payment on that condo came out of my own checking account, transferred from my own savings, earned by me, managed by me, protected, when it came down to it, by me. When you own something and you pay the bills, you make the rules. I know that now in a way I couldn't have articulated before all of this happened. I also know this. The people who love you don't ask you to make yourself smaller to make them more comfortable. And when someone shows you that they're willing to use the legal system as a pressure tactic to take what you earned, they've told you something about themselves that you can't unhear. I'm not angry anymore. Or not only angry. It's more complicated than that, the way things with family always are. But I kept the condo, I kept the documents, I kept the recording of my father's voice on the phone, saying things he now wishes he hadn't said. Not to use against him. Just because the truth of what happened belongs to me too. And some nights, when the city lights are doing their thing and the coffee is warm and the mortgage payment is $210 less than it used to be, I let myself feel what I actually feel. Proud of myself, sad about my family, and grateful, more than I can really say, that I did not sign anything. People always say that family is the one thing you can count on. I used to believe that. I held on to it even when the evidence was pointing in a different direction for years. My parents paid for my brother's college and I took out loans. They covered his rent and I budgeted down to the dollar. They called me strong and capable, and I took that as a compliment for a long time before I understood it was just a convenient story they told themselves so they didn't have to feel bad about what they were doing. What happened to me didn't come out of nowhere. It was the result of a long pattern, the kind that builds so gradually you don't see it until someone hands you a document you don't remember signing and suddenly the whole picture snaps into focus. My parents had spent years giving my brother everything and asking nothing in return. And then when the debt caught up with them, when the HELOC was drawn down and the bills were real, they looked around for a solution. They looked at me. They had always looked at me when they needed something to hold the whole structure up. I think about the choices I made differently now. Every time I said no to a vacation, every weekend I worked a second shift, every month I transferred money into that down payment savings account instead of spending it. Those weren't sacrifices in the tragic sense. They were decisions. Deliberate, intentional decisions made by someone who understood, even at 23, that the only foundation she could truly rely on was the one she built herself. That's not cynicism. That's just something I learned earlier than most people have to. Here's what I know about how things actually work. Strict of any comfort or myth, what you build through consistent, honest effort tends to hold. What you build by cutting corners, by borrowing against things you don't fully own, by pressuring people who trust you into signing documents they don't understand, that tends to collapse. My parents' HELOC didn't fall apart because the universe was punishing them. It fell apart because it was built on an unstable foundation, the same way their relationship with me was built on an assumption that I would always absorb whatever they needed me to absorb. Miss Okafor used the word unenforceable about that buried paragraph on page 4, but what I heard was, they tried, and it didn't work, because you had done everything right. 9 years of documentation. Every receipt, every bank statement, every mortgage payment logged and time-stamped. The truth of what I had built was verifiable. It existed in paper form. That's what protected me in the end. Not luck, not someone fighting on my behalf, but the simple, unglamorous habit of doing things correctly and keeping records of it. There's something I want to say to anyone who's sitting in a situation like mine right now. If your family is using guilt as a tool, if the word selfish gets thrown at you every time you try to protect something you earned, please understand that guilt is only effective when you believe it's deserved. I sat in my car in a parking garage for a long time after that phone call with my father. I felt it. The guilt, the grief, the specific sadness of realizing that the people who were supposed to love you unconditionally had attached quite a few conditions to the whole thing. But I did not sign anything I hadn't read, and I did not hand over what was mine. My condo is still mine. The balcony, the 14th floor, the city lights, the $210 cheaper mortgage payment, all of it. And every morning I wake up there, I feel the weight of every choice that led to that moment, the hard ones and the quiet ones, and the ones nobody saw me make. That weight isn't a burden. It's evidence. It's proof that the life I have is real and that I built it and that no one can take that from me, not even the people who tried.